Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Susan and I discuss an article in the Chronicle for Higher Ed by Eric Hoover, and it looks at a new attempt to incorporate a student's character in the admission evaluation process. Susan will be back for another segment, as the 2 of us will answer a question from a dad who wants to know, how should a student present a selective program like Tech Girls in their application? So colleges understand all that is involved in both getting in and how enriching the experience is. Isn't it risky to just assume every admission officer is familiar with a program like Tech Girls? So Susan and I will tackle that. And then Julia and I continue our interview with Lee Coffin, the VP of Enrollment and the Dean of Admission at Dartmouth, as he does a spotlight for us on Dartmouth College, part 2 of 3. And our Dartmouth interview is our spotlight for the week. Susan, great to be with you as always.
Hey, Mark, it's wonderful to be back on a recording with you today. We made it through November 1st, but barely.
Barely. We still have our wounds. But we love what we do. That's why we keep doing it. So
that's right. It never gets old.
Yeah, and I love talking, with you, Susan. Not only do we have a 20+ year friendship, but I just think you bring such a complexity in how you approach things, because obviously you've been on the college counseling side for more than 20 years. Yeah. And then you have almost as much experience as a reader, at multiple different types of schools. And it just gives you such a great lens. And so I want to get your feedback on the admissions tip. My admissions tip today is to not, in your activities section, you only have these 150 characters, right? Boy, there's so much we could say about this. In fact, you and I should probably do a whole series. We should do a whole a segment on tips on how to fill that section out. You, me, Julia, a group of us maybe do it. But I'm just going to hone in on one point, and it's a problem I'm seeing a lot of, which is students saying things, wasting, I call it wasting real estate, wasting those 150 spaces to say things that were already either in the years. So, you have to say whether you did the activity 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th.
Right.
So they're either, they repeat that, or the title of the organization, they repeat that, or they say the word high school, that they fully spell out, and you've wasted 10% of your characters for something that was already clearly there.
That's right.
And so, how often do you see this as a reader? Because I'm seeing it a lot in my students when they ask me to review their activities section. So I'm assuming you're seeing it as well.
Absolutely. Being concise and putting themselves in the position of a reader is really helpful to the kids. I can always point out, for example, the acronyms that, like, I had one just the other day where a student had said MITES, MITES.
Right.
And I was like, I know I've heard that, but there was no context in the description.
Was it about Harvard's, MIT's MITES program they were referring to?
Well, but that's not what MITE stands for. It was the MIT summer program, but it's, mathematics in something or other. I can't remember right now. I move on to another student and I wipe the disc clean in my mind. But
sure.
But the student was giving me a hard time about it. And I said, well, listen, talk about a waste of real estate.
Sure.
If the reader, I'm not a STEM person.
Right.
Your application in the first go round is not usually read by a person in your discipline, reading for the discipline. It's usually a general triage reader who does that first analysis, whether it's committee-based or solo. Then it's going to move on into the other committees, one of which may well be a discipline-specific, what a lot of colleges call the vertical, meaning it's going up the ladder into a more specialized reading if and when the applicant gets through the first round of elimination, which, as you've mentioned, is usually about 75-80% of the applicants, especially at selective schools. So you got to watch out for those abbreviations. I think there's some that you can use to save space, and high school HS certainly is one of those.
I think abbreviations is a great tip in of itself because, like you said, I see problems like you on both extremes. You were highlighting, don't give me, and I had one the other day, don't give me an abbreviation that I don't know what it is, because that's going to frustrate me. But then I also see you can do JV. People know what JV is.
Yes.
And they know what HS is, and so there's some that you can really strategically use. Another one I like to do with students is W/ for the width. It's really clear. And my favorite one is using the ampersand. That's Shift 7 on your keyboard in place of the word and. I've seen this save a student 8 characters, and they only have 150 characters max on the Common App Activity section. And so there's some things you can really do that are strategic that way. So abbreviations are tricky because we see extremes on both ends. I think spelling things out in full when you don't need to, but then giving me an abbreviation, I don't know what it is, and you're in that world and you assume everybody knows. So you got to be careful with that. Just like people do sometimes with clubs too, right? With clubs, they do that sometimes.
Absolutely.
Too.
And there's some things like the student I was talking to about might said, well, do you know what FIRST is? And I said, yes, I think everybody would know what FIRST is.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
In fact,
robotics.
It's not really an acronym anymore. It's a proper name. Just like SAT is no longer an acronym. It's a copyrighted word.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is tricky, but that's why kids always should have their lists looked at by somebody who isn't kind of intimately knowing everything they've ever done. An advisor at school, an English teacher, a friend, even a friend. Sit down with one of your classmates and read each other's lists and give each other feedback on that. I do find that some kids try and take their whole resume and abbreviate it into the activities list, which means each of the 10 activity spaces is a big umbrella item that then they're trying to fit in all these different things. And sometimes you just have to be the wiser for it and see additional information. If you've got a lot to add, not everybody needs to do that. As a reader at a selective university, I don't really need to know the Lego competition you were in ninth grade, because in 11th and 12th, you were on the varsity first robotics squad.
Sure.
So there's some things you can do in a resume or additional information, but it only should be used when you either need to explain something that's not readily understandable, or you need to elaborate in a way to give it greater meaning.
Yeah, let's come back at some point, Susan, and, throw somebody else in as well, either Vince or, one of the other members of the team, Julia, somebody, and let's have a more robust conversation on activities. Because I know, like you, like that's one of the things I'm doing nonstop at this time of year is helping people with that. And quite honestly, I think it's really good use of people's times, because I know when I've sat in the reading process, that is something that gets attention. Like that is looked at, right? And I had a student I'm working with, and they attended an information session with Santa Clara this week. And it's one of those ones where they were giving them a lot of tips as well. They're
That's
giving them
great.
some good pointers on their personal statement, and everything they said was really good stuff. And one of the things they said on activities, they said, we're really going to look at your first three. You know,
Yes.
the first 3 to 5 are going to get more of a look than the bottom 6 to 10. And so, you know, I was helping a student out in the Maryland area, and boy, the difference between her first draft and her second, because some of these things, they're really just coaching. It's not, once you give people some pointers, they can really, I mean, you've worked for 4 years. It's a lot of hours sometimes. You know, you want to get credit for what you've done, or you want to write in a way that resonates with an admission office. So why don't we look at coming back,
Sure.
Susan, and just doing an overview of tips, because, you know, I mean, we could give 50 tips just on the activity section. We're just picking 1 or 2 out here.
Well, and interesting with our article du jour on character, the growing influence of measurable non-cognitive qualities in the admissions process, particularly at the most selective schools. This is a really good thing to talk about, is how do you as a student convey not just achievement, but character.
Yes.
And does character, well, we're going to be talking about this.
We'll get to that shortly.
It's not so much leadership, it's a lot of other things. And the activities list can really support how a student chooses to come across in their application. Very, very important.
Yeah, I mean, in any important part of the application, right? Like when you see that consonance between what you put in the writing, what you put in the activities, what may be supported by curriculum choices or what you did over the summer, and then what rec writers say. I think that's what can really make an application sing, is when there's that harmony, and because ultimately you're trying to understand who this person is.
That's right.
And that clear messaging comes across, just gives you a comfort level. Like, I feel I see who they are. I mean, obviously it's not the same as having spent hours with somebody, as much as you can, having, got to know them through paper.
Right.
But some
Absolutely.
applications really come through clearly, where you really get a sense. You know, we could do a whole thing. Rec writers can play a huge role here too, a huge role outside substantiation to really, present that clear message. But you know how you and I are, Susan. If we don't move on, we'll be hanging our hat here forever.
We won't get to our article.
We won't get to our article. So the admissions vernacular is application inflation.
Ooh.
Which is the rise of apps, per school, per student. And the big number is 43%. So the 20 most selective schools, this is according to Common App. Common App puts out some great information, by the way. I'm going to be drawing quite a bit off of some of the research and some of my big numbers. I have a little big number file where I'm, recording some of the data. But according to Common App, the 20 most selective schools were up 43% from 2019 to 2023. And it's application inflation is what it is. That, and we've seen it. The way people react to the increased selectivity is, boy, I need to add 5 more applications to cover myself. That's oftentimes what people do, and it's understandable, that mindset. Well, give myself, I want to win the lottery. I didn't win with 1 ticket. Maybe I'll win if I buy
That's
20,
right.
Like it's under,
That's right.
Of course, as college counselors, we're first and foremost concerned with, one, that your list is balanced, and then it's balanced. Yeah. It's balanced with schools across multiple levels of selectivity that you would be happy to go to any of them. You might have heard me say this, Susan. I've come to this point now where I feel someone's got a good list when they have 3 likelies or probables they'd be happy to go to.
I think that's perfect.
Because everybody tends to gravitate towards the reach and the stretch and the challenge schools. And then they focus there. Maybe the targets or mid-range, or pick whatever term you want to use for that, that middle bucket. And they sort of think, well, I'll add some of these because I know that I need to. Whoever I'm talking to, whether it's a parent or a counselor, is going to say you can't have all very selectives. But the mindset oftentimes is, boy, would I ever be beyond disappointed if I ended up here. And so I think that second part is really important. I'm not just saying have 3 likelies or probables. 3 likelies or probables that you would be happy to go to. I'm not asking for it to be your aspirational school. I think that's too much to ask. But there's a difference between your aspirational school and, you know what? I know I can get a great education here. I know I can have a great experience, and I know it can catapult me to many, many opportunities.
That's right. It's going to give me what I'm looking for. It's going to be affordable for my family, and it's going to be a stepping stone that's going to get me where I want to go.
I'm glad you threw in affordability.
The problem is, Mark, of course, for very high ability kids, for high achievers, it's very hard to pinpoint. Although we can do it.
Yeah.
You know, those of us that are professionals in the field, we can still do it. But it's the burden on the student, of course, is not coming across in the application like that college is 20th on their list of 20. And it's very perceptible.
Well, that's another reason why I really want 3. I really want at least 3, because either a school's doing yield protection or a student, like what you just said. I don't know if listeners, if you caught what Susan said, it's very perceptible when somebody nonchalantly goes through the process and a school can tell the student's not engaged and not likely they're not taking us seriously. It really comes. Right. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? Because I think that might be surprising to people, how much you can pick that up.
And some people just label it demonstrated interest or demonstrated engagement or level of an applicant's interest. And yes, that's where you have to start when you're trying to determine if a college on your list is in some way, shape, or form measuring, whether it's a small influence or whether, like the wonderful podcast you did a couple months ago, Mark, on the algorithm process that some colleges go through now, that they pay companies to come in and score applicants so that the reader isn't necessarily looking to see who opened how many emails, but they're basically just getting a mathematical analysis of a student's engagement over time to see what it's predicting. But, you know, the way I explain it to the teenagers is, look, your application is going to be hot or cold. And hot means you're like in any sales marketing job that you're in. It means that you are a consumer who's been doing their homework and they've been moving down a pathway toward being a potential buyer. Mm-hmm. And all businesses, AKA colleges, know what that looks like. You know, knows the accelerated pace of research, participation in events. You know, you've talked a lot about that on the podcast very, very thoroughly. And colleges would rather admit a warm applicant, especially when they're in the gray middle of their applicant pool, where decisions can go either way. And they're done kind of making decisions on all the kids with institutional priorities and hooks. And now they're looking to bring in whatever percentage of the acceptance pool that they have to give to just great, well-qualified kids, of which there are many more than they can admit. And it's no longer really about the academic rating. Sure. It's going to be about whether or not the college feels you're going to enroll. Yeah. And if you're in the middle of the applicant pool and your rating predicts that you could be admitted, you could be a waitlist, or you could even be a deny. I remember this even starting my liberal arts admissions career, several decades ago. We had all of this in mind. Sure. And we would at that point, and now colleges all do, look at what makes an application warm. And you know, I'm saying to kids that as soon as you put an application in your Common App list, the invitations you get from that college are going to have greater value. You should be paying attention before that moment in time and building a track record of interest, but especially once that college is on your Common App list. The colleges know that, right? As a potential applicant, you have checked a box in your Common App profile that says, sure, let colleges know when I've put them in my college list. You can always take them out later. Yeah. But don't delay with that. And then suddenly the invitations become more specific, more higher value. I had a student the other day like I had never said this to him before, right? And it was not, I had said it when we met, I'd said it in a report I wrote, and he was like, oh, really? So I said, so are you looking at the emails that come in? And he goes, well, it's overwhelming. I said, well, you are only put 12 colleges in your Common App list. So that's only 12 colleges right now, anyway, whose emails you should be looking at assiduously. That's a Mark Stucker word.
I do like that word.
Love Mark's vocab. But so suddenly he's in while we're talking on Zoom. He goes in, he goes, oh my goodness, I just got an invitation to sit in on a virtual class in my area of interest at one of the colleges on my Common App list. He said, I'd love to do that. I said, well, get on it. So he's coming to that party a little late, but there's no time like the present to start, right? So he can jump on that and get going with those kinds of, I said, you got to warm up your application. Think of it as a fire.
Yeah.
You're rubbing your hands together. You're getting the circulation going, and you're convincing them that when they get to the point in the applicant pool where they still have some room left for great kids like you who do not meet an institutional priority, you want them to give them every reason to pick you.
No, that's great. And I'm glad you mentioned that colleges are businesses, because sometimes people don't understand that. Of course, they're businesses. They have to balance their books, in order to operate or they'll be obsolete. And I have two quick stories on a point that you made. One was from the SACAC conference that you and I were at last year, in Jacksonville, Florida in 2022. 2023. Yeah, 2023. Yep.
Yeah, it was
April 2023.
It's when we all got COVID, Mark.
Yeah, we both got COVID there. The only time I've had it. Anytime I've had it was after that.
Me too. Everybody I know at that conference came back.
And I didn't have it when I was there, but when I left, I had it. Yeah. So I attended a presentation by Rhodes, and I appreciated their transparency. And if they could say this at the conference, then I feel I can say it to our audience. I don't remember if they used the word yield protection, but they described what was yield protection. They talked about how there is an applicant who they have research and they know is not coming. And they said, why should we admit them? And basically it was a stealth applicant, Susan, like no engagement, none, right? None. They said their research shows that student has a less than 1% chance of coming, less than one. So we're not going to admit them. When I visited High Point with Lisa, same thing. They said, if you ghost us, we're ghosting you right back. And then here's another twist to it. In meeting with Oberlin, as a positive side, they said, there's only so many resources. So we run a campaign where we have students call students. We also run a campaign where we mail view books out, the old-fashioned view books. But there's not enough money to mail that to 4-color stuff to everybody. So they use level of engagement to decide who gets a phone call and who we're going to spend, the money to mail the big curriculum, the fancy expensive materials on our college to. And to me, that's just being strategic. And you want to, and I like your use of hot and warm. Like, yeah, that's a great way of explaining it. I'm going to steal and borrow that one from you.
Please do.
Surprise.
I'm sure I didn't make it
Were you
up.
Using that one back at Westtown days? I don't remember you using it. I don't remember that one from you.
Because I really struggled with how to get this point across. And, it was a lesson I learned from Tufts University in the years that we were at Westtown.
Yeah.
Because Tufts was one of the first schools that was so transparent about saying, we are so tired of being, we're too good a university to be a backup to everybody.
And for many people, it would be Brown and Tufts or,
and Harvard and MIT, everybody, if you love the Boston area, it was awesome. And they did a lot of research on which kids enrolled and what their contact histories were.
Right.
And boy, did they shift gears at that point. And at our school, I saw who they started turning down.
Yeah.
And who they started admitting. And again, it wasn't the kids who were institutional priority kids.
Sure.
It was the gray middle of great students who clearly were getting through the academic review with flying colors. But, you know, and colleges they have a shrinking number of spaces for those kids.
Yeah.
So they want to be very scientific about who they take. You know, you can say that maybe, you know, ED is the greatest way if you don't meet an institutional priority, and if you don't have a hook, obviously that seems to be the biggest hook. But I'm just talking about the rank and file.
No, because we know ED is not going to be for everybody for a host of reasons.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Tufts, we learned our lessons from them. And, you know, when I started reading applications in 2018, after I left our school, it was for a school that tracked every click on a website and every email and whether or not it was opened. Now, I could see that information when I read an application, but it was very distracting.
Mm-hmm.
And colleges have moved away from giving first readers that level of information in favor of these algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
Because now the people at that university can simply see a score that reflects whatever they have decided is important. And that's really different institution. It's not all clicks on the website.
Right.
And the pandemic threw a monkey wrench into all of this, of course, because in-person stuff was lost for a period of time. And so what we don't know now on this side, on the student side, student parent counselor side, is we don't necessarily know which contacts feed into the algorithm, but there's some obviously, and the ones that reflect engagement or participation are always in there.
Yeah, always. And you know, in the essays too, like there's a reason why there's so many why us, why this school, why essays, right? Like they really can tell a lot, and a seasoned admission officer can tell right away how well you know us, how much research you've put in.
Yeah.
Do you really understand what you're getting into? Did you make a case that you're a match for who we are?
That's right.
And if you haven't, that's just a quick way to not be taken serious. And I really appreciate you. You did this in your session with Lisa last week, Susan. I appreciate you constantly referring to not the institutional priorities, because I find most people really don't realize at selective schools how many spots are just not available because schools have a lot of institutional priorities, right?
That's right.
Yeah, some of them they're very clear on, some of them they're not clear on, and they keep close to the vest. But when you take away those institutional priorities, and then you start realizing even, they're going to want just your state, your gender, your location, like the list the list gets pretty small of how many available spots are there for you. And I don't think that people realize that. And so I think we almost can't say it enough.
Right.
I mean, we don't want to be one-trick ponies, but we, this whole podcast is just kind of flows out of what we both see in the counseling room, right? We get a sense of where are the areas that people are not getting certain aspects of this process, and how can we use this platform to help people, and as a free resource that is accessible to people of all incomes if they're willing to put the time in. And
that's
so,
right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Well, let's segue to our article. I tell you what, I could have just talked to you forever on this. This is good.
That's a really, and it's funny, Mark, because I'm right at the juncture in my year where I'm going back to being an application reader.
Oh, good for you. Well,
we're always gonna
want to get tips from you.
I'm happy to do that. But it's funny because I've been thinking as I've been reading my training material and revisiting this. And so much of it, I was very pleased to be able to read a lot of these articles for our discussion today, because it's so relevant to this, the work that I do.
Yeah. So our article today is called "A New Push to Assess Character in Admissions." It's a great article by Eric Hoover, July 27, 2023. I'm a big fan, as is Susan, of the Chronicle. It used to be kind of cost prohibitive, but now it's $9 for a monthly subscription. It's really, really well worth it for families that really want to kind of get more, get beyond just the surface level stuff when it comes to college and college admissions. But I want to read large portions of it. I was telling Susan before, boy, the article is so good. I'm having a problem selectively deciding what to read, but I'm hoping this will give you a sense of the article, and then I want to turn it over to Susan to get her thoughts. So it says the National Association of College Admission Counseling on Thursday announced a new character focus initiative to elevate the importance of non-academic factors and personal attributes in admission. The association, known as NACAC, recently acquired the Character Collaborative, a volunteer organization that promotes character in admissions. The new initiative will expand on that group's advocacy and research and perhaps broaden its impact. And here's a quote by David Hawkins, who's the Chief Education and Policy Officer for NACAC. We're only capturing what's on the surface when it comes to student strengths and potential. The question is, how do we capture these intangibles that fall outside the things we try to quantify on paper? We're trying to get beyond the relatively shallow ways in which we're looking at applicants. The grades students earn in high school and the courses they take carry the most weight in admissions evaluation, and that's not about to change. But as any honest admission officer will tell you, grade point averages and standardized test scores reveal relatively little about a student. That's why many selective colleges use a so-called holistic review. Interest in so-called non-cognitive attributes or soft skills isn't new in admission circles. Some colleges have experimented with ways of measuring them for years. Back in 2016, dozens of colleges endorsed a plan to promote and reward ethical engagement or displays of high character in admissions. Around that time, some colleges expressed an interest in gauging applicants' grit or students' perseverance in pursuit of a long-term goal. Hawkins sees a new opportunity to refine the way colleges evaluate evidence of applicants' personal qualities, such as curiosity and integrity. The Character Collaborative has started a valuable conversation about measuring a wider range of students' abilities, particularly among applicants who aren't broadly represented in higher education. As it so happens, the Supreme Court's decision makes this conversation ever more important. Now that colleges can't consider an applicant's race per se, some experts predict admission officers will pay more attention to adversity that students might have experienced. Looking at persistence and overcoming obstacles will become more and more important, says Robert Massa, who co-founded the Character Collaborative in 2016. Massa, Vice President Emeritus for Enrollment and College Relations at Dickinson, recalls evaluating applicants early in his career who stood out even that they lacked top-notch academic credentials. I remember thinking in a number of cases, this young woman or this young man will add something special to our campus. We've got to have this kid. It wasn't until later on I began to realize that this something that should not be ad hoc. There should be some organization to it. The Character Collaborative formed in part to help colleges derive rubrics and best practices for assessing students' personal attribute. The group of 74 member institutions and organizations has held annual meetings to help admission officers recognize the importance of character and define it in a way that's meaningful to their college. We want to help figure out a way to assess character consistently within that institution, Massa said, so that if two admission officers are reading an essay and trying to assess a student's character, they're doing it in the same way. Character is a loaded word, or a squishy one, at least. Reasonable people might disagree on its meaning. The Character Collaborative has defined it in 4 ways, Massa says: civic character, ethical character, persistent character, and intellectual character. Students who express a respect for others, views, say, or a willingness to engage in collegial debate. By character, the group does not mean personality. Tom Baer, VP for Enrollment at Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology in Indiana, and the most recent chair of the organization's board of directors, believes that considering specific non-academic factors helps his staff make better decisions. At Rose-Hulman, 2 admission officers read each application, rating subjects in terms of academic fit and community fit. They score applicants in 4 categories: initiative, responsibility, resilience, and passion for science, math, and engineering. Now, Susan, this is that rubric that Julie and I talked about the other day, that
That's right.
sometimes schools are willing to share their rubric, when they shared theirs. When we look for non-cognitive character traits, we're trying to find students that, first of all, fit within that community, Bear said. We're looking at all those different aspects, along with the high school curriculum, to triangulate and ask, is this a student who belongs at Rose-Hulman? My number one job is to bring kids in to a community where they'll be able to succeed. Yes, you can measure character. You can quantify resilience too. The list of intangible qualities you can capture goes on and on, according to Nathan Kunsel, a professor of psychology at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, who studies the prediction of performance in academic and work settings. The catch, such measurements require a lot of time and effort, more than most institutions could probably ever spare. Colleges attempt to do this to a certain extent, Kunsel said, but very few of them do it well at all. Many selective colleges require applicants to submit one or more essays, which in theory gives admission officers a glimpse of who the student is. But even when students write their own essays, what do these samples really tell you? All the research I've seen on personal statements and essays suggests that they're very poor predictors of student success, Kunsel said. I would certainly consider reducing the number of essays and making them more focused on the things that are most central to the culture of a school. To do that, schools will have to be clear about what they're all about. And unfortunately, most colleges and universities say they want everything from everybody, all the good things, rather than being a little bit clearer about what their main focus is. The idea of trying to measure multiple things about people is great, he said, but the relying exclusively on human judgment to combine it together is problematic. We tend to take good information and make it poor. You think I should stop here, or should I read any more? What do you think, Susan? It's a good overview. You think that's enough?
I think that was an excellent overview, Mark. And I think if families are interested, they should go ahead and access this article, because it really is so clearly written and gives so many good resources.
Yeah, and we'll put the link in the show notes. I could go on, but I really want, Susan has a lot of great things to say on this topic, and I really want to hear from her. I do want to just read one more thing, though. I liked what it said about Sam Bankman, the person who was over the scam with Bitcoin and everything.
Right.
And here's a quote I liked. Comes from Mary Bigham, co-founder and executive director of Accept, which is admissions community cultivating equity and peace. She previously worked in admissions before becoming a college counselor. Here's the quote. I don't see these character questions ever being applied to wealthy white kids, she said. Would Sam Bankman-Fried still get into college under these character measures? What about Brock Turner and all the people who do active harm on our campus? Someone wrote recommendation letters for all those students. If you can tell me how we're going to keep people like that out, then I'll start to care about character. So it's a controversial perspective, but I still, I like to bring different voices in and sort of let them be heard. But with that, Susan, I want to turn it over to you and just, talk about what's on your mind, because I know you and I have talked offline about how do you measure it and what are your thoughts?
Well, I want to start with the last thing that you mentioned, Mark, or I'll forget about it. Marie Bigham saying that I don't see these character questions ever being applied to wealthy white kids ever. I totally disagree with that. And I think that may have been an older quote. Marie is someone I respect enormously, so I'm not challenging her perspective. Sure. She's been a leader in the voice for race-based admissions and articulating the Supreme Court decision for schools and colleges.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I don't agree with that, but I think the interesting point that made me think really wasn't that point. It was, would a Sam Bankman-Fried still get in? Because this was a guy that was identified at MIT as a genius amongst geniuses for his...
That's right.
And so it just made me think. One thing I did like about boarding school admission is we made students submit their last math and their last English teacher recommendation.
You made that specific.
Right? Yeah. And, so many times people would be like, can I submit somebody else? I kind of didn't really get along with that teacher. And so that would be revealed. And I think the point, we kind of let you pick whoever you want. It's pretty easy in most instances when you combine the fact that teachers like to help kids in general. you can usually find a pretty good rec writer. Of course, that's just recommendations. It's one thing, but I guess I'm asking, do we have the apparatus in place to be able to identify character in a way to count it? And are we appropriately putting the weight on character that we should, given how important character is for your campus? And quite honestly, even how well it's going to be correlated with life success. You want a proud alumni that goes out and makes a difference in the world. Chances are their character's probably pretty commendable. Anyway, there's so many directions we could go with this. I just want to know where you want to. I want you to take this where you want to go, Susan, on this.
This brings me back to my early years in admissions. So we're talking about the 1980s here,
right?
And we are also talking about a small residential liberal arts college with strong egalitarian and historic values around community and equality. So the reason why I say that about Bates, where I was working at the time, is that every college and university looks at character through the lens of the type of community that they are building.
Mm-hmm.
And a big urban, only partially residential university might have other indices that point to success.
Sure.
Because they are building a different kind of university, a university community. So each college is going to speak to this very issue in their mission statement. And you've heard me say this before, Mark, but every student I work with now, on my first homework assignment sheet for them is to read the mission statement for each of the colleges that they're interested in, which usually includes history, values, and strategic planning,
mm-hmm.
because that's one of the only places an institution is going to be revealing about their highest priorities for their curriculum, for their residential program, for their athletic program, and for their admissions process. There really may not be much else, but it's very interesting then for the student, part B of the assignment, is you go to the admissions website and you look at how a college describes its evaluation process. Some colleges do that much better than others, and I find it does not necessarily line up with size. You might think, smaller colleges are going to be much more inviting and informational. Now, one of the best ever is Johns Hopkins, and
mm-hmm.
I use that as an example. They discuss the 3 areas of evaluation. Each one is laden with both academic, performance criteria, and character criteria. It's not like they have academics and blah, 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 and then there's a little character area over on the side. Each of the 3 major areas of evaluation for that university, and for Michigan, look at their website. They do a nice job of showing you exactly how they rate applicants. But, it behooves students to say, well, what does this college say are its pillars? The kinds of things that have historically represented the school and continue to be strategic priorities. And then in terms of admissions, how are they applying those priorities to the admission process? And this is where kids and parents seldom take my advice. Can I just say that? Because it seems so uninteresting compared to the other things that they want to hang their hats on and that they find attractive. And and then later in the process, they'll say to me, like I mentioned to you, Mark, before we started, should I apply early decision to, Boston College or Villanova or whatever,
right.
Georgetown or Notre Dame or whatever to call. And I have to bring them back to that very foundational issue of, okay, on paper, you're looking at similar institutions. When you get under the skin of the institutions, they have remarkably different structures, curriculum design, and personal quality values. Even though some of it's the same, what you're looking for, I'm beginning to sound like Julia now. Some of it's the same, some of it isn't the same. So so what we used to do at Bates, now we're going back a ways now, but I have to admit, everybody does this to some extent now, several decades later. So we're talking about, 30 years ago. Every year, the admissions office would ask the faculty to give us their list of picks and pans in the graduating class. And actually, I think we called them peaches and plums because we weren't trying to lead, but what we wanted faculty as well as administrators, deans, athletic directors, coaches, everybody who worked with kids. We wanted them to tell us in the senior class who in their mind rose to the top as extraordinary, whatever, depending in the physics classroom, in the chemistry lab, on the football field, in the student government, whatever their corner of the college universe was. They didn't even have to tell us why. They could, a lot of them did, because they had just watched the class graduate and they were full of nostalgia at a small liberal arts college. And then we asked them, who do you wish we had never admitted? And what we found out about that group, and faculty and staff were happy to give us those names. Some of them were kids who they felt were academically disengaged or so badly underprepared they weren't able to ever catch up. Seldom that way, though. These were mostly students who either the faculty and staff saw a lot of unfulfilled potential, or meaning maybe disengagement, or negative impact on the community.
Character. And
boy, did we get that with both barrels. And then what we did, this was back in the day where we could pull those students' applications. This often is no longer done. Colleges seldom keep the entire applications. Once in a while they do, but often they don't. Everything's digital now, so things get separated out before the permanent record is created for the enrolling class. But we would go back and read those applications again as if we had never read them before and look to see what surfaced for us. Now, the interesting conclusion was sometimes there wasn't anything that we probably would have done differently. Mm-hmm. But sometimes there really was. Sometimes there were students who fit a bit of a profile, and I'm not going to unpack that because it would feel very prejudicial, and it's only one college. But we began to become more familiar with the kinds of things we let get by us in the admissions evaluation, where things did not add up in a way where we probably should have let that student come into the class.
Friends, this concludes the first part of Susan and I talking about the importance of character in Eric Hoover's article in the Chronicle. Hope you join us next week for the final part.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, you are in for a treat. Susan is back for another great question. And hi, Susan.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi. Listeners, I'm not just saying this, but we were talking before we came on how much we liked this question and just how great all the questions have been. So please keep sending them. We actually could use a few more. Sometimes we go through times where we get 10 in the kitty, but I think we only have about 3 or 4 in the kitty. So send your questions to speakpipe.com YCBK. But I'm going to play the question, and then I just want to let Susan answer it in your own way, Susan.
Okay.
Hi, I'm a parent of a high school junior and have really been enjoying your College Bound Kid. Thank you for all the great help. My daughter participated in an amazing 3-week summer program for girls in STEM called Tech Girls. It's a selective international program paid for by the State Department. This year, there were 120 some international girls and 15 U.S. girls. I've heard that colleges give more weight to selective paid-for programs like Tech Girls than to non-selective college experience summer programs and camps. My question is, how does she convey the nature of programs like Tech Girls in her college applications to make sure it's given proper weight and isn't mistaken as a standard campus college experience camp? It feels risky to just assume colleges will be familiar with Tech Girls and other programs that deserve a little more credit. Would it make sense to list it under both activities and honors? Thanks for your help.
Well, Mike, you're asking a question that's probably on the mind of a lot of parents as they think about how they're going to help their college applicant child put all these pieces together in the application form to form a really holistic, positive representation of different things that they've done in their life, and the young person that they're becoming, the young adult that they're in the process of developing into. And both as a college counselor and as an application reader, I know where you're coming from, because on one hand, kids do summer programs for a lot of different reasons. Personal enjoyment, to develop skills where they already have some expertise and want to bump to a higher level. Maybe they've got something they want to explore academically that their school has not been able to offer them much coursework or any coursework in. And then occasionally a student has a chance through a competitive process like the one that you describe to be part of a really extraordinary, and in this case, international adventure that is, in this case, focusing on girls and technology, an area that I assume your daughter probably has some interest in and maybe is accumulating some academic coursework in. So here's the skinny on this.
Hey, Susan, I just had an idea. Would you be okay if I just gave a little bit of an overview on Tech Girls? Because I think our listeners might find it interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had not heard of this program. Had you? I don't.
No, and I didn't look it up either, and I should have.
That's okay, because I did, and I was extremely impressed, and I can see why he's a proud father, having had his daughter participate. But let me read a little blurb, and I think it'll bring our listeners into the loop a little.
Sure.
So it says, Tech Girls is a U.S.-based summer exchange program designed to empower and support young women ages 15 through 17 from the U.S. and select countries around the world to pursue higher ed and careers in science, technology, engineering, and math through hands-on skills development training. In 2024, the program will support 111 young women from 37 countries and 13 U.S. And 13 plus U.S. peers in a dynamic 4-week U.S.-based experience with a 7-month mentoring program, including pre- and post-exchange. Since 2012, Tech Girls has trained and mentored 653 teenage girls. Initially, the Tech Girls program focused on countries in the Middle East and North Africa. In the summer of 2022, Tech Girls expanded globally, engaging a talented, STEM-minded young women from the U.S. and select countries in 6 regions of the world: Western Hemisphere, Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, Eurasia, East Asia, Pacific, Middle East, North Africa, South, and Central. The core of Tech Girls program is a 24-day experience in the United States in partnership with Virginia Tech. Participants engage in an interactive tech camp that provides an in-depth examination of cutting-edge technologies and various educational and professional paths in STEM fields. Then Tech Girls travel to a city around the U.S., either Austin, Chicago, Cincinnati, Denver, Detroit, or Seattle, for community immersion and STEM-related exploration. The Tech Girls program yields a multiplier effect as participants return home to conduct community-based projects with 7 months of mentorship, and it's 100% paid for by the State Department. So there's just a little background. One question, I think, the fact that both you and I had not heard of it, I think Mike is onto something when he says that I don't want to assume everybody's heard of it. So I'll let you take it where you want to go.
Gee, I'm glad, Mark, that you told us about the program where, it was familiar to me, just probably I've seen it on an application, but if it didn't stick with me, it probably means that the student on whose application I saw it, whether it was last year or a few years ago, didn't explain it. Because it sounds like an extraordinary program, and especially because it's not at all what unfortunately has been nicknamed pay to play as the type of summer experience or other things where you can get some pretty fancy looking stuff on your resume or your common application activities list that
just have to drop 10 to 15 grand.
Can be wildly expensive and, has value. I'm sure all these programs have value, but what parents need to realize is that the value truthfully is in what the student takes away from the program. Whether or not there is influential relationships, academic work, hands-on co-op or internship work, and how the student in her application is able to articulate the learning process and not just I learned Python and I learned, this coding language and I have a, robotics, whatever certificate. But what about the people she was sitting in class with who were from other cultures and other countries or other socioeconomic backgrounds? Or, how did her identity as a young woman in STEM, how was that influenced? How is her worldview different from attending a program where sponsored by the State Department, she was in a minority of American teenagers sitting in a very international group. So the first thing parents, and Mike, I know this is where your question's coming from, is the first thing parents have to know is that it's the value of the program, the learning experience that the student is able to articulate in their application is what admissions evaluators pay attention to. But how it supports the student's academic interests. How is that student changed forever because she had this experience? And again, not just learning a new language, coding language, but learning to see STEM through different cultural perspectives, things like that. So amazing, but she's got to tell the story. She's going to have to unpack the program, and not from a resume perspective, but more from a personal narrative perspective, so that the reader is educated as she then says, here's what it was, how I got involved, what the experience was like, what the ongoing value is going to be, and how I know myself better and my destiny as a result.
So question for you, Susan, because Mike said, should she put it in honors and activities? And for one, honors isn't going to give you a chance to convey a narrative.
Right.
Activities you could, but boy, 150 characters is pretty limited. A couple other options would be a personal statement of how you grew and changed in your time through the Tech Girls, and that would give you plenty of time to flesh it out. And another would be additional information.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on those four things? Honors, activities, additional information, personal statement. I guess we could even throw resume, fifth on there. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I think it depends on the story, on the depth of the narrative. I think it deserves more than an activities listing, although it certainly could be there in that very short blurb, allowance of numbers of characters. It could be in the honors section, but the narrative itself will either have to be part of a larger essay, depending on what she's going to decide to write her personal statement on. But it could also be a whole separate entry under additional information.
I thought of something else, Susan. I hate to keep interjecting. What are your thoughts on if she's coming from a school that has a counselor write-up? Would you see a place for her talking with her counselor about how she was impacted by it, and then having the counselor say something, not in place of, because we always talk about the student voice, but as a supplemental line that, boy, she came back fired up after this experience. What are your thoughts on that as an ancillary entry?
Even better than the counselor recommendation, Mark, I hope that one of her teacher recommendations will come from a STEM teacher. Sounds to me like she might be very interested in STEM. We don't know what subject area, but I would hope that a classroom teacher would be someone who would really see the effect on her that this program had, especially because there's a 7-month mentoring component that's going to, maybe some of it will proceed, but it sounds like it'll follow. Whether Mike's daughter is mentored by former participants in Tech Girls or by someone at Virginia Tech, we don't know, or someone who was teaching in the program. But there's clearly going to be some long-term education and impact that this program is going to have on her, which I must say is very unusual for a summer program, especially one that's fully funded, which makes Tech Girls stand out even more as an enormously value-added experience. But, Mike, remember, all the colleges are going to know is what they read in the application. They don't look at an activity or a summer program or even an award and say, ooh la la, you get an extra point because of this, whatever the title is. And I think a lot of parents kind of have that in their mind, that there's like, well, which one is more impressive? And that just, the one that's most impressive is the one where the student can honestly reflect on the impact that the experience had, not just, oh, this was great, and now I know I want to take more computer science classes, but on the much larger development of kind of a self-image as a college student interested in the subject.
Yeah, just to reinforce your point, how many times, Susan, have we been asked when we're working with a student on their activities, how many times have they said to us, which one is better?
Yeah.
Tell me what order to put them in. And I think it's hard for people to believe that colleges mean what they say when they say, which one do you care about? Because I'm trying to understand who this person is.
Right.
And I'm trying to understand where they may contribute on my campus. If you just try to game the system and don't really tell me that, then it loses a lot of its value. But I get asked that question almost daily. So that reinforces the perception of the pecking order.
Right.
They're the really good ones and the really bad ones. But this is a special program. 13 students from the whole United States are selected. And I think you'd agree, Susan, when you're reading through apps and you're on pace and you have to get through whatever it is, 25 a day, 40 a day, whatever, it's all different for every school. But there's not a lot of time. You can't expect your reader to go looking up Tech Girls. Some may do it, but you certainly can't assume that.
No.
And even if they did, it's going to be a 20-second cursory glance. It won't do the justice to it. And most of the time, it's just not going to happen. There's too many people that use abbreviations for clubs and things that you don't know what they are. And you just sort of have to shake your head and say lost opportunity and keep moving on.
Yeah. And don't ever just put a link and say, for a description of the program, click here. Because first of all, that's a little insulting almost to the reader of the application.
So glad you said this.
I really want to hear what the student has to say to describe the program, even if they're kind of quoting pretty heavily from, the mission statement of whatever the program is or whatever, but to put it in their own words. And also remember that a lot of links don't work in Slate, which is the reading platform, which colleges use to import the Common App, Coalition app into, so that it then is presented in a standardized form to the readers. I think, as a first reader, neither of my universities had clickable links. They were dead links on the page. Now, I think when the application might have moved on into more of a specialty reading, if the student made it through the first cut or two, and then the college really was splitting hairs, trying to decide who they were going to keep in the pool, perhaps for that field of study or whatever, then maybe some links become available, but you cannot count on it.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to inject our admissions tip right here. And I know Susan will agree with me on this one. So many students miss an opportunity, and we see this all the time, because what they do is they describe the what. So they'll describe Tech Girls, they'll describe the activity, but and that's nice because you need some context. But if you don't go into how you were impacted, it falls right in that category of missed opportunity. Anything you want to say on that, Susan?
No, I just agree with you. I agree entirely. It's not that you do something, it's what you make of it and what you have learned and are carrying forward. Absolutely. And colleges also, Mark, are very aware of the fact that some kids, they have to work in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get, even 4 weeks off necessarily to do something that isn't going to help support the family. And colleges have become increasingly conscious of this and are aware that there are some students out there that never get to participate in these kinds of activities and have to find other ways to shine in their applications.
Yeah, so we're really giving, quite a few things that we've said. Definitely, Mike, you're going to want your daughter to not assume that readers know what it is. Don't put a link up. When you describe it, be sure to talk about how it impacted you, how you grew, how you changed, how you see the world differently. And you have some options, I mentioned the personal statement as one option, but I always feel uncomfortable to say you need to do it in the personal statement because you might have another personal statement topic that you feel strongly about. It reminds me of the student the other day, Susan, who said to me, should I apply ED to Chicago or UVA? And, you get that question all the time, different schools maybe, but we're never going to tell you that. That's too personal. I responded back, I said, that's like you saying to me, who should I marry? I know that's a stretch, but I'm not telling you that. You're going to have to figure it out. I can tell you from my experience how the schools are different.
Right.
I was a little uncomfortable in that case because it was someone who hadn't visited either, but they were determined and, I can't stop them. But it just kind of reminds me of that a little bit, in this case, you're going to need to pick if you want the personal statement. That's an option, but you might have something else you feel even more important to talk about. But you got to get it in there somewhere. And I'm so glad you brought the teacher point up because you're so right. Presumably there'll be a STEM rec as one of the recs, assuming you're applying to a school that, that asks for recs. Not all do. And, Susan, you and I have talked about this before, like, have a conversation with your teacher, right? Tell them why you selected them and what you're hoping will come across. There's a way of doing that without you dictating to them what, word for word, what you want them to say. But the combination of teachers wanting to help students, and if you're not asking them to say something that they're uncomfortable with from an integrity standpoint, there are many teachers that love a little bit of guidance and direction.
Absolutely. Well, and especially when an experience has been so growthful. And,
correct.
I have a feeling as I'm thinking about this, that Mike's daughter may have asked a STEM teacher at her high school to write a recommendation that helped her get her accepted by tech girls.
That's true. If they're only taking 13 kids,
oh my goodness,
the chances of them not having a rec in there pretty slim. And
so
plus
that might be
putting the funding up for 7 months to do that. Yeah. Good thought there, Susan. Yeah. And so, we had mixed feelings on the honors thing. Let's delve on that a little deeper. What do you think, Susan?
I think it's fine. There's no harm in touting something like a program like Tech Girls that's so selective as an honor. But Mike's daughter is going to have to think about, you get 5 spaces in honors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there may be other things that she wants to call attention to in that section of the application. If there's room there, then why not? But she also doesn't want to be kind of a one-trick pony.
Sure.
In a way that the same thing is coming up everywhere. Now, on one hand, that can be a good thing, that it can kind of unify the application thematically. But there are also probably other things in Mike's daughter's universe that are important for her to share in the application. So as she's thinking about how she's going to strategically get different dimensions of herself in the application, something like this could well be repeated because it is an honor. I honestly don't think colleges would care one way or the other.
Yeah.
They're not going to go, oh, look, it's an honor. That section of the application is kind of suspect anyway.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So many admission officers tell me I don't really spend that much time looking at the honor section.
No.
I really don't. And so there's definitely not, and the characters are very limited. There's less characters there than there is in the activity section.
That's right.
So there's really not an opportunity for narrative there.
Right.
I have a question for you. It's a little off topic, but I've been starting to ask admission officers this. So if you look at the writing on the Common App, it talks about list your academic honors.
That's right.
Whereas the UCs, they have much more broader language there. And what are your thoughts? Because I've heard some people say, I don't really, I don't really care if you talk about other things, especially if it's maybe something somewhat academically tangential, like debate,
Oh, sure.
or something like that. But then I've heard people say, we really don't like athletic honors in there. That feels a little different. And then I've heard some people say, we're not that persnickety. You put what's important to you. What are your thoughts on that, Susan?
Well, I think it's got to have some academic connection. I think you're right on that. Scholar athletes awards absolutely could be there. But, I got a JV letter in, my, in 10th grade. No, that's not, that goes in the activities list if you're really intent on sharing it.
Example.
But there are a lot of things that kids will consider academic. Robotics sometimes crosses over into that. Certainly science fairs, debate, history, contests, DAR, competitions. So there's a lot of stuff that has academic content in it, but it shouldn't be purely non-academic. Think about awards at schools, the English prize for the, 10th grade or
book
things
awards.
like that. Yeah, book awards where you're singled out.
Comment on your, you mentioned those are kind of suspect. Do you want to share a little bit more what you meant by that?
You mean activities lists in general? Or
we're
honors lists?
Honors, yeah.
Well, you know what? When I say suspect, I think a lot of kids feel like they need to fill the whole thing up. So, does an application reader care that you were on the dean's list? Or
that you mention it 4 times every semester?
I know. But, you also have a lot of empathy for teenagers who are filling these things out, trying to figure out what's going to make them look the strongest possible.
And not only that, Susan, I've had some really strong students say, I don't have that many,
Right.
like really strong students. I don't really have that many because all those things you mentioned are not things that every school always does.
They absolutely do not. And some schools are very intentional. Progressive schools are often very intentional about, they may have some recognition, ways to recognize kids. I mean, Quaker schools, we were there. We wanted to call them recognitions as opposed to honors. Honors feels like a personal acclaim, whereas recognition is for lots of things that young people do well and are recognized for. So, kids just have to do what they can do in that honors section. Keep it clear, keep it, like you said, connected to academics, and don't worry too much about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike, for sending this in. And please send in your address because you are going to get a copy of Dr. Lewis Newman's excellent book about thinking critically on the college campus. And so Lisa did a fantastic interview with Dr. Newman, and he graciously sent in 20 copies of his excellent book. And we'll send a copy out to you if you'll send your address in. And please send us some more Speakpipe questions, especially if they're as good as this one.
That's right.
Thanks,
Mike.
Susan. Thank you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, Julie and I continue our interview with Lee Coffin in part 2 of 3. And in part 2, Lee answers a Speakpipe question from a listener. So you can get 2 Speakpipe questions on this episode. And just like in our first interview, when Lee broke some new news by talking about how Dartmouth went from test optional to test considered, Lee breaks some even bigger news in his detailed answer to this question from Claire. Lee drops a big number on us when he talks about how they use 64 types of data just in their initial review process. He talks about a brand new process they created to evaluate applicants in a way that no other school that he knows of or we know of is doing quite the way that Dartmouth is doing it. And Lee answers multiple questions that listeners sent in, both in Speakpipe and written questions. Lee explains why the peer rec may be his favorite part of the entire application file. And Lee answers the question, why are Dartmouth and Davidson the only colleges that are asking for a peer rec? Listen and enjoy. So this is our first question from a listener, and it was sent in verbally through Speakpipe. And so on the topic that Lee actually did address a little bit earlier in an episode, we were talking about admissions in general, but have you share more specifics about Dartmouth. So take it where you want to go, Lee.
Okay. Hi there. My name is Claire McCaffrey. I'm the mother of a junior, just starting to look at colleges. I heard on another podcast, Lee Coffin, the guy at Dartmouth, his podcast, that they're starting to use, or they use AI to do some preliminary screening. I may not be getting that completely correct. My question is, what or how are colleges using AI in their readings of these kids? Thanks.
In a very preliminary way, we have started to adopt some machine learning into the way we sort the pool. We're not making decisions based on that. Admission officers still look at all the files and move them into the respective pathways. But given the volume and the reality of the calendar and my goal of preserving as much reading time as possible for the students who are advancing deeply into our process, where we need to read and reread and debate and think. To make space for that, the digital world is helping us gather some data on the front end that helps us sort applicants into pathways to move from the beginning to the end of the process. And it's been,
I have to ask, what data are we talking about here? Is this GPA?
So we're using academics. So we're using 64 different combinations of academic data, depending on what's available in a school, and we weight it accordingly. So, things like the obvious things like, is there GPA, is it weighted or not? Is there a way of assessing the rigor of curriculum in the high school? Is there class rank? Is there testing? What kind? And the combinations of those elements around academic achievement give us a way of taking a big pool and starting to sort it and say, okay, let's start at the top and work our way through it. And as opposed to reading them one by one without any intentionality, and you may be reading the wrong ones first. And so we've you asked a question about volume and how we've had to rethink the way we do our work. This is an example of that, where we've had to pivot a little bit from the old-fashioned way of starting and just documenting and reading everything to say, okay, let's be clear at the beginning about where to begin.
Do you take any institutional history into consideration? Like some schools, when they have a track record of a lot of students from a school, they've,
no, we're not doing
in first year class from this school, any of that kind of stuff.
No, so we're not doing anything historical. Context comes into it, so we are adding contextual elements from the school. So when there's profile data that we can plug into one of the logic trees to say X% go to a four-year college, here's the mean SAT against the student's submitted score. We're taking pre-populated information and we're putting it through an algorithm that helps us sort the pool up front. And it saved us, this year was the first year we did it, it saved us about 3 weeks of work.
Wow.
Yeah. And let us get into the reading process much sooner than we were able to do in other years when we were manually going one by one through all those files with admission people doing it. And also it just made it less open to misinterpretation by various admission officers. We were, an admission officer could override the algorithm, but that was rare.
Did you come up with the 64 criteria by like brainstorming as an admission office? Was this the work of consultants that you outsourced? How did you come up with that?
We insourced it. This was our senior admission officers last summer had a retreat, and I had a working group that kind of plotted through it and said, like, what is available to us on the secondary school report, on a transcript and testing through the College Board landscape, like what's out there that we could glean from the documents submitted, populate our database, and then the logic tree kicks in and says, okay, these elements are present. This is algorithm 27. Whoop, and it came up with an academic assessment for us.
As you network with other peers at other schools, how common is this, Lee? How many,
I think I'm a pioneer.
Yeah, because I'm not hearing this.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
I'm
am
a
I
history.
that much out of the loop on this? I mean,
no. I was sharing this with some fellow deans recently, and they were like, wow. And I just, it was a giggle because I was a humanities student, but the data is there for us to use if we can. And what in this example I'm sharing is me trying to think creatively about what do I know? How can I have the technology we have help tee up the work, not do the work. This isn't a Chat GPT version of reading a file, but help prep it so that the admission officer can go in and more elegantly use the information that's been submitted and spend time where we need to spend time.
Well, anything that saves 3 weeks, I have a feeling you're going to have some other schools reaching out to you and asking for some tips.
Yeah.
This is where you tell Dartmouth, hey, let me get some consulting money on the side.
Yeah.
Let's do a patent. No, but it was, all of it is, none of it was invented. It's all there in the secondary school report. It's, being able to just load it into your computer and have the power of technology help map it for us.
I do think it's important for us to let our listeners know, though, that you're not just making decisions off of this. You're still doing a full holistic read with the human element, bringing in aspects of nuance that cannot be captured by landscape or, secondary.
No, we don't do this.
School profiles. Yeah.
No. What I'm describing doesn't touch an essay or a recommendation or an interview. It's, it's taking what was the first step in our reading process, which is the academic review, and automating it to a degree that lets the admission officer then go in and say, okay, this has been calculated for me. Does it seem accurate? If not, why? Or, there's a new piece of information. I'm going to plug it in, and it's adaptive. So the score adjusted as we added new, when we see Julia's letter saying, if we ranked, she would be number 3. You can plug that in, and that changes the algorithm.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
This is Linda with today's recommended resource, the Midwest Student Exchange Program. Part of the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, MSEP is a reciprocity program comprised of 8 Midwestern states that agree to charge students no more than 150% of the in-state resident tuition for specific programs. Some schools will actually provide a waiver covering 100% of the difference between in-state and out-of-state tuition. Participating private schools usually offer a 10% reduction. Currently, over 70 schools participate from the following states: Indiana, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. The average annual tuition savings for a student using the program is $7,000. Important to note that schools can limit the number of incoming students using the program. Receiving schools may set higher criteria for these students, and they may also cap the total number of students admitted using MSEP. The application process and enrollment deadlines vary by school, so students should contact the institution they're interested in attending for details. You can find a list of participating schools along with each school's contact information at msep.mhec.org.
So we have 4 more questions that came in from listeners. I'll ask one, and Julie's going to take, I think, a couple of the others. So, friends, in editing this interview, I realized I used a technical term some of you will be familiar with, but some will not. I'm about to ask Lee about Student Search. Student Search is a College Board service. Every time your student takes a PSAT, SAT, or an AP test, they're asked whether or not it's okay for colleges who are interested in them to reach out to them either by email or postal mail or both, to contact them if they are potentially interested in the student. The student fills out some information before they start the PSAT, SAT, or AP, such as intended major, self-reported GPA, gender, and in the past, race was used. We're in different times now, and the colleges can't see the exact test score, but they can see the score within a 50-point range. For example, a school could say to the College Board, give me boys from West Virginia who score 1150 or higher, who self-reported GPA of 3.2 and are interested in English as a major. And if the student selects the yes box to the question, then the colleges can begin reaching out to them. College pays a little more than 50 cents a name to the College Board, and then they can begin a targeted recruitment process, entering that name into the top of their admissions funnel in the prospect category. And then through a process of emails and snail mails, they attempt to generate an applicant from the student. It is critical that you understand that a college does not have the courses the student has taken. When they pick names to target, they don't have the transcript. They don't have any teacher recs, counselor recs, or other recs. They don't have any extracurricular activities, grade trends. They don't have that. They don't have the personal statement or answers to any custom questions by the college, and many other things they don't have. Some colleges admit less than 10% of the students they target with their perceived recruitment mail. This is the College Board Student Search product. And unless you understand that, my next question won't make a lot of sense. For a more detailed explanation of Student Search, you can go to episode 289 of YCBK. And our In the News feature, we did a point counterpoint, which is basically a debate between Brennan Barnard, who's not a fan of search, and Rick Clark, who likes search, on the pros and cons of Student Search. We also did a deep dive on episode 28, which is entitled, Why Am I Getting All This Mail? And we did one other episode at the start of year 2 that did an even deeper dive into this topic. A listener wants to know if Dartmouth uses Student Search to target students in affluent zip codes, and if so, why? And I'll give a bit of context because this listener has also sent in some other things on this topic before. And the perspective being that seeing great value to Student Search for rural kids, under-resourced kids, but when you're targeting affluent zip codes, it can feel like recruiting to reject. Do people in these areas really need to get lots of mail, oftentimes encouraging them to apply when they may or may not be competitive? And so that's just a little bit of background, but just if you could take that where you want to go with it.
We don't do that.
There you go. That's easy.
Good. Thank you. My students find you just fine.
Yeah, we don't do that. I mean, we don't do it. I can just, the speed round can have a speedy answer. We do national searches where we say, here's we're doing more around academics. So, we're doing a search now for students who took AP Environmental Studies or who listed environmental issues on their testing and kind of help getting those names so we can introduce our environmental curriculum to them. So that's an example of the limited way we use search here, but we're not a big consumer of names.
There you go. You know, a lot of people are, so I'm sure that's music.
They are, no. And well, you know, I'm lucky to work at a place that is visible.
Thank you. Julia, you had a question?
Yeah, another question from a listener. Is there a character or non-cognitive assessment in the application review? And if so, can you elaborate on what that looks like?
There's not directly a character or non-cognitive review. We discussed some of the qualities that would fall into both of these. I would put them all under the personal evaluation we do of a file as we're reading it and saying, who have we just met? You know, what are the attributes that animate this person in and out of a classroom? You know, we have a category called classroom presence that speaks to fits. You know, I described Dartmouth as a particularly tiny place, particularly within our peer group. And so classroom presence is important. So as we read a file, you know, we are paying attention to what's the voice, what's the impact of this student in a classroom.
Cool.
I actually love the peer recommendation because for whatever reason, my students feel like, oh, so an adult needs to read it before it goes out. And so I love reading their friends, or one of my favorites ones was a student whose 12-year-old sister, but she was a boarding student. So she didn't really grow up with her younger sister. But I will say, I just really love those pieces.
Yeah, no, the peer recs, you know, are one of my, might be even the favorite part of the file when they're there, because they're such an authentic, unscripted, firsthand account of the applicant.
Yes.
And often syncs with other things that have bubbled up in the file, but done so in a way that is really genuine. And often, you know, the person writing the letter will say, like, I am so honored to be speaking on behalf of my fill in the blank. And that's endearing too. And you learn, you know, sometimes people in the same high school write the letter for each other, and you think, that's nice. You know, these two friends, both applying, wrote each other's letters. And
so why do you think so few people have the peer rec? I've had Chris Gruber on the podcast before. And he's a big fan of the peer rec as well. And as far as I know, you two are the only schools that have it as a recommended. And for those of you who are not following us, Davidson and Dartmouth allow an applicant to pick a friend, someone who knows them, not necessarily a teacher level or an adult level, and just write about them that way.
Yeah. I don't know why everyone doesn't ask for it. I know why we do. So I've described where Dartmouth is and the kind of community we're trying to build. And on the admitted student questionnaire this year, we ask students to give them a list of adjectives and say, pick 6 of these that you associate with Dartmouth. And number 1 was community. So, which I thought, yep, that's right. And the peer recommendation is insight into that.
Great.
Well, I would say that the 3 weeks of work that you saved, that I would imagine if a lot of colleges introduced a peer recommendation, they'd also have to think of their workflow as well.
Yeah. They're fun to read, though, I have to say. They don't, like, it's our last in the queue. It's our last thing. And they're delicious. They're just really, you know, reading them often makes me smile. My funny one was, it was a boyfriend-girlfriend pair. And I think it was the girlfriend writing for her boyfriend. Girlfriend. And she said, and for what it's worth, she said, he always gets me home by my curfew, which my dad really appreciates. And he's an awesome kisser. I'm like, well, there you go. Like, that's exactly, you know, that's
reason for admitting.
There you go. But it just was so, like, earnestly shared.
Right.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of Julie and I interviewing Lee Coffin. We hope you join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode 380, I'll be continuing my 3-part series looking at test scores. And this week I'm going to look at 2 things to be aware of when it comes to using the common data set to look at the test score profile for a school. there's a couple things you need to be aware of that may not always make it the best place for you to get your data or your information. And Lisa will be continuing with part 3 of 4 of their outstanding interview with Dr. Andrea Brenner, the author of How to College. And friends, I've been closing you out with quotes related to writing, related to the personal statement. And I've got a list of 15 I grabbed off the web. This one comes from Ken Anselman, who had been the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Lawrence University up until 2022. And Ken says this: "It's true that your voice is what we are looking for. When you write your college essay, use your authentic voice. If you're a serious person, write your essay with a serious voice. If you're a funny person, be funny. If you're not a funny person, your college essay might not be the best place to try on that funny writer voice for the first time." See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.